Good morning, and thanks for joining us. I'm Joe Votel, the President and CEO of Business Executives for National Security, otherwise known as BENS. To quickly dispense with a few housekeeping items right up front, today's event will feature presentations by our commission members, followed by a question and answer session. Questions may be asked at any time through the question and answer button. Please type in your questions, all located down the Zoom bar, and they will be presented to the panelists for answering once we reach that portion of our event. We will try to answer as many questions as we can within the time we have this morning, which is about 60 minutes. For those who may not be familiar with BENS, we are a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization founded in 1982, consisting of senior executives from the U.S. business and industry sector. Our mission is to share the unique private sector and business knowledge and talents of our members with leaders across America's national security enterprise to help keep our country safe and secure. When COVID-19 breached our borders last January, we realized that in addition to the scientific and medical challenges facing the United States and the world in getting the pandemic under control, there were response plans, operations, and processes that would be critical components of a successful response as well. But as the human and economic devastation continued to skyrocket, it became increasingly clear that it was exactly those three components which were really struggling. Convinced that best practices from the private sector could be used to improve not only future pandemic response, but response to any national crisis, BENS stood up the Commission on the National Response Enterprise to determine how to achieve that goal. 33 of the nation's most accomplished leaders on these issues enthusiastically agreed to help us in this effort. Our commissioners include former senior military officers, CEOs of some of the most respected American corporations, a former cabinet secretary, a Nobel laureate economist, former White House Homeland Security advisors, bipartisan members of Congress, and state and local government and emergency management officials. Their findings and recommendations are detailed in the Commission's call to action, which we officially released today. The choice of words here is deliberate. This is not just a report. It is a roadmap for implementation of specific and actionable recommendations. Release of the call to action marks the start of a second, and we would say more critical phase of work on pursuing the policy, legislative, regulatory, and administrative changes necessary to implement the Commission's 11 recommendations. Our call to action is available at www.bens.org/2021 CNRE. In it, you will find a complete list of commissioners, BENS members, and others who played a leading role in its development. More importantly, you will find our 3 findings and 11 specific recommendations, as well as the necessary detail that supports implementation. I'd now like to introduce our 3 co-chairs to talk about the Commission's work, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. Many of our commissioners are also with us today, and I may call on several of them to respond to questions where their expertise is particularly relevant. Our co-chairs, who have done yeoman's work in leading this effort, are the Honorable Jay Johnson, former Secretary of Homeland Security, Mr. Alex Korsky, Chairman and CEO of Johnson & Johnson Corporation, and Mr. Mark Garenser, former Managing Director of Booz Allen and the current Chairman of BENS's Board of Directors. Over to you first, Mark.
Thank you, General. It's good to be here, and good morning, everyone. I guess on behalf of the co-chair, since I'm first one out, let me first recognize and thank our commissioners. And if we could put the list up, please. As you'll see when you look at this list, this is truly a unique group. It has leaders from government, business, and civil society, all participating in the commission. And in particular, these leaders come from all aspects of industry as well as all aspects and levels of government. So for example, the industry verticals that are included here are energy, financial services, healthcare, life sciences, blue chip high-tech companies, telecommunications, manufacturing, chemicals, and transportation. And then from the government, we have previous leaders who served at the secretary level, as well as advisors in the White House to multiple administrations, heads of agencies, including 2 former FEMA administrators. We had 2 senators from each side of the aisle, as well as several 3- and 4-star flag officers who had the opportunity to lead various commands that are related to emergency response. Now, some of the commissioners are here today, as General Motel mentioned, who will be available to take your questions. And I'll just mention those of commissioners who are on the line. We have Admiral Thad Allen, Barbara Bennett, Senator Dr. William Cassidy, Bill Flynn, Craig Fugate, General Frank Grass, Ambassador Stuart Jones, General Stanley McChrystal, Admiral Joe Nimitz, Chris Roberti, Christy Rogers, and last but certainly not least, Ginny Romney. And why is this group so important, and why did we assemble such a diverse group? We believe that any solution that we put up, for it to really function well, work, and sustain, requires a view of the problem from all of its aspects. And these commissioners come from where they sit, see a different aspect of the problem. And by combining it, it gives us a chance to come up with solutions that are much more sustainable and effective. And what is the problem we're talking about? We're talking about major shocks to the United States, like COVID-19, which obviously had many effects, including where we lost as many Americans, if not more than in World War II. It has impaired our economy and imposed a multi-trillion-dollar debt load on the national balance sheet. It's bankrupted hundreds of thousands of businesses, of which many may not make it or come back, and created record unemployment. These are indeed national level emergencies with national security implication. Yes, today it's a pandemic. Tomorrow it may be something else. It could be another pandemic, or it could be a sustained cyber attack on one of our 19 critical infrastructures. Or it could be a physical attack by terrorists on our electric grid, or a national or global drought, or something unimaginable like a geostorm. COVID-19 did expose our shortcomings to events of such scale and magnitude, which put human lives at risk, our economy, as well as our national security. As we conducted the commission, we realized that the best posture and best response for us would that be of a whole of nation response. And a whole of nation response is more than a whole of government response. This is indeed a response that harnesses the capacity and ingenuity of all the 3 sectors that our commissioners come out of. It's government at all levels, federal, state, and local. It's businesses, both large and small. And it's our citizens who want to volunteer and help, and the NGOs that are in the system designed to help. By taking a whole nation response, it introduces more resources and more capacity, and resilience is about adaptive capacity. It also gives us the opportunity to expand the innovation horizon, identify areas where the government alone or business alone may not see or know. So how do we get this done? We got it done through 5 work groups. Can we show the 5 work groups, please? So these 5 work groups were basically led by co-group leaders, and they touched 5 topical areas that we felt was very critical. That includes surge, meaning getting the right thing to the right place at the right time. And surge looked at stockpiles and looked at demand signals. We had a work group that looked at supply and supply chain resilience and visibility, and supply chain onshore and offshore. We had a work group that looked at people, and in particular, skills, critical skills, and human resources, and how we might leverage those human resources across the boundaries of the states. We had a working group that looked at roles in the government, roles in business, roles in society, and how those might flange. And then we also looked at all the impacts on the economy and our infrastructure. So the heavy lifting was done by these C-suite executives from 60 companies. And these are BENS members or affiliates who've donated and volunteered their time to do the research, the analysis, synthesizing the findings and the recommendations, and then portraying those findings and recommendations to our commission through a series of 6 meetings. Now, some of those working group leaders are here today, and they'll be also available to help answer any questions that you might have. Those folks who are with us today are Peter Dordahl, Stanley Waltz, Dr. Roger Shedlin, Chris Smith, Sam Cole, the Honorable Thurbert Baker, and Chris Musselman. And I would finally point out at the end here on the last page of this chart that we had an advisory group who guided me and General Votel through this whole process. And my hat's off to them for their assistance and help. Now, in the end, we made a major discovery. And that discovery is much of what we need is in place, at least on paper. But roadblocks exist to their effective operation. You know, under our federal system, the Constitution gives the 50 states the duty of care of its people. That's the health, safety, and welfare of its citizens. And while this has many great attributes, for example, by having the states respond, it allows customization to occur. So a state can address the particular situation that it faces. But it also makes it a little more difficult to organize a national response. Now, crises that affect all the states simultaneously and persist and produce these second and third order effects really require a different approach and a different mindset. So we need to shift our mindsets from one of autonomous state operation to one of national cooperation. And this is very analogous, frankly, the military went through this when they moved their philosophy from single service operations to a joint warfare doctrine. And we need to do the same thing. This would move us from multiple independent state responses to a United States response. So our commission makes 11 recommendations that get us towards this goal, strengthening our response against these large-scale shocks. So now I'm going to hand it over to my co-chairs, Alex and Jay, to highlight some of the details of this recommendations. So let's start with Alex. Alex, over to you.
Mark, can you hear me?
We can hear you, sir.
Okay, trying to get on camera here. There we go. Well, Mark, thank you very much. And let me just say at the onset what a privilege it's been to participate and to serve in this with you, but also General Votel, Secretary Johnson, and the many other really talented commissioners that frankly rolled up their sleeves and wanted to get involved and help and participate in any way they could to make sure all of us do a better job when faced with this scenario or other future scenarios. Look, like many business leaders, when this all started, I think that we were trying to figure out first, what can we do within our respective industries, within our respective companies, to try and navigate our way through what was a very, uncertain period. And at the same time, I think many of us, whether it was independently as companies or there were organizations like the Business Roundtable, Business Council, and others, we're also trying to figure out a way of, look, we want to help at a federal, at a state, at a local level. And what's the mechanism by which we could do that? And, too often, I think what we found was that we want to help was followed by, but we really don't know where. And as time went by, I think we all realized that we definitely needed to have a better system in place to coordinate our ability to work in conjunction with governments at several levels, and really just to establish clear lines of communication and coordination, during this crisis. And that, by the way, that's not only with the corporate sector, so to speak, of the business sector, but also among all stakeholders that we come in contact with. Now, you're going to find a number of recommendations in our call to action aimed at doing just this. And we tried to keep them practical. We tried to keep them pragmatic, but at the same time address what we feel are some of the core issues getting in the way. Now, some of these are going to range from something as straightforward and as immediate to the creation of an inventory, so to speak, at its state and federal crisis response roles with something as simple as up-to-date contact information. And it also goes as far as something regarding the transformation of FEMA's national response coordination into truly a 24/7, 365 kind of operation. Now, redesign of the Response Coordination Center and creation of a new surge center within FEMA, we believe has got real potential to establish state-of-the-art command centers for national emergency response. And we think this is going to be essential to addressing something we heard about from the state emergency responders, civil organizations, and businesses alike, the absence of a common operating framework for an emergency response. Well, this is a real challenge for stakeholders across the board, but it's got a particularly significant problem for participants in surge and supply operations where you've got to make decisions rapidly and frequently you're lacking complete information. Now, the Commission also believes the technology, inclusive of public and private partnerships, really holds the key to powering an integrated national emergency response moving forward. And adoption of things like interoperable IT systems and technologies like modern cloud and network infrastructure, AI, intelligent automation, machine learning, blockchain, well, things like this that we're using in businesses all around the world, particularly here in this country, well, they've got great potential for real-time data sharing and response between all federal, state, local operation centers, and they can help really create a shared visibility to facilitate fast, well-informed, thoughtful decision-making at all levels. But real-time awareness of need doesn't help if there aren't resources on the ground and available to deploy. So in the call to action, you'll also find recommendations on the national imperative to engage more American citizens in disaster recovery and emergency response. Now, similar to what some of the other people on this call, like General McChrystal, have proposed, we really endorse and call for the creation of a civilian expertise reserves, really modeled after the National Guard, to recruit civilians with targeted skill sets like healthcare, cybersecurity, as well as online marketplace aggregator to identify and recruit other really interested and willing volunteers. And with the escalation of declared emergencies in recent years, these kind of resources are absolutely critical to make sure that we've got enough hands, enough heads on deck to really pitch in and help when we need them. So now I'm going to hand it over to Secretary Johnson to talk about some of our most forward leaning and learning recommendations. Jay, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Alex. It was a real pleasure and an honor to co-chair this commission with you, with Mark. And when General Votel called me some months ago in his capacity as the CEO of BENS to take this on, I was happy to do so. I did not hesitate from the task because I think we all recognize the importance of the work here. When I was Secretary of Homeland Security for 1,124 days, I had the occasion on numerous times to visit sites of disasters, natural disasters, whether it was in Washington State, Texas, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Arkansas. We saw a terrific combined effort at the federal, state, local level, and among volunteers like the Red Cross and so forth. All of these disasters had one thing in common, though they ranged from mudslides to tornadoes to hurricanes to floods, but they all had one thing in common. They were regional in nature. They were local in nature. And as Craig Fugate used to tell me all the time when he was FEMA administrator and I was secretary, the response to a natural disaster starts at the state level, and the states call upon the federal government to assist on the assumption that the disaster is regional or local in nature. COVID, as we all know, was something very different. COVID touched every corner of this nation. It touched every state in this nation and continues to do so. We are approaching, as we speak this morning, 450,000 dead Americans. This was a disaster on a national level, not a regional level, not a local level, a national level. Not since the pandemic of 1918 have we seen something that has attacked our homeland to this extent. So what do we do about it? The pieces, the components are there. At the national level, you've got FEMA, you've got HHS, you've got DHS, you've got the Department of Defense. At the state level, you've got the National Guard, you've got state emergency response, state homeland security agencies. At the local level, very often you have the same thing. We have NGOs, we have the private sector, we have terrific members of corporate America, such as Johnson & Johnson, for example. But what we lack at a national level is a whole of government, whole of private sector government response. What we lack is a national response framework, initial caps, national response framework, national response enterprise to coordinate all of these components in the event of another nationwide disaster. And we're not just talking about a lethal virus. We could also be talking about, as was noted earlier, a drought or a cyber attack. We need to be prepared for the next disaster at the national level through a national response enterprise. And that's what this commission talks about. That's what this commission calls for. I want to highlight just 3 recommendations that resonate with me, given my former public life. One is FEMA, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security, should be in the lead for coordinating the federal response. FEMA, I'm a huge fan of FEMA. FEMA knows how to deploy assets. It knows how to coordinate large-scale efforts. FEMA should be in charge of any federal response to a nationwide disaster like COVID or a cyber attack or anything of that nature. Number 2, we recommend that Congress take a look at the possibility of amending the Stafford Act to expressly include pandemics and cyber events, not just natural disasters. Number 3, we recommend that the Secretary of Homeland Security be tasked every 2 years with formulating, developing, and issuing a national strategy for emergency management, similar to what we do now at the federal level with a national defense strategy that is issued every 2 years. So we now know what the problem is, and it's incumbent upon our nation to fix it. Thanks, over.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary, and Alex and Mark for your great comments. Help kind of frame our call to action and report. Before I open it up for questions and answers, I want to quickly touch on 2 additional recommendations about which many of the commissioners felt strongly over the course of our deliberations and our work through the fall. The first is this: that every citizen have equitable access to broadband. The fact that an estimated 19 million Americans or more lack reliable, high-speed internet profoundly hinders both response capabilities and the resilience of a national, state, and local economies and education systems during emergencies. High-speed, low-latency broadband is no longer optional. It is an economic, national security, and civic imperative. Everyone will also note an emphasis in the call to action on the criticality of trust across the emergency response enterprise. Trust is obviously not something that can be legislated or mandated. It is something that emerges through regular interaction and shared experiences. The complexity of U.S. emergency response that Secretary Johnson described demands more rigorous ongoing testing of plans and core capabilities than now occurs under the FEMA National Exercise Program. The Commission strongly recommends creating or redesignating a leadership position within the Department of Homeland Security to oversee the development and operation of a comprehensive national crisis response exercise framework to carry this out. I mentioned back at the start that the choice of the words call to action was deliberate. That is because the real work here is only just beginning for us. Until they are implemented and resourced, these recommendations are just words on paper. We look forward to working with the new administration, with members of the 117th Congress, with state and local authorities, as well as other stakeholders in industry and society to elevate our ability to prepare for and respond to future crises. Now, we would be very welcome, we would welcome your questions. So let me go to Lisa for our first question.
Thank you, sir, and good morning to everyone. One quick reminder for people who have not yet asked a question, please use the Q&A button located on your Zoom toolbar. Our first question, your report focuses a lot on FEMA. Can you elaborate on the importance of FEMA having the lead role in coordinating emergency response from the federal level, and also what the redesign of the National Response Coordination Center might involve?
Thanks, Lisa. Excellent question. And the report does focus a lot on FEMA. And we're very fortunate today to have a number of commissioners who have extraordinary experience, not just with FEMA, but with response efforts. And I'd like to actually reach out to Admiral Thad Allen and invite him to provide a response to this question. Thad, over to you.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you, Thad.
Okay. There we go. Thank you very much. First of all, I apologize for being socially distant from a jacket. I wasn't aware we were going to have the call, but happy to join you this morning. The most important thing in a national response is unity of effort. Unless there's a clear designated lead department that's got the responsibility to lead it, under Homeland Security Presidential Directive 5, that principal federal official is the Secretary of Homeland Security. And FEMA has a National Response Coordination Center that's capable of coordinating those types of responses. But what I think we really need to do is take an example from the military and apply it to the private sector and to the government. That's this concept of a supported commander and a supporting commander. What we need is a robust framework, allows us to support the operations, as was stated earlier, across the federal government and then down to the state and local level, which has a primary responsibility for disaster response. To do that, it's going to require an increase in the infrastructure and the capabilities of the National Response Coordination Center. Now I would defer to Craig Fugate if he's on for the rest of it.
Craig, if you're able to comment there, we would love to hear a little bit from you.
Joe, this is Jay Johnson again. Can I chime in?
Go ahead, Mr. Secretary, please.
The reason we spend so much time emphasizing the importance of FEMA is a can-do organization. They know how to get things done. They know how to deploy resources. They know how to work with state and local governments. They do so on a regular basis. And other components of the federal government could take a lesson from FEMA. Frankly, over the last year, FEMA has been underutilized in the COVID response. Put FEMA in the central role of coordinating any large-scale effort. And I believe specifically through the leadership of some of the people who are part of this commission who really have built FEMA into a top-notch government agency, they will get the job done.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary, and Thad, thanks for your comments. Really appreciate it. So what I'd like to do is let's go back to Lisa and let's take the next question, please.
All right, we actually have two supply chain related questions, so we're going to present them together. The first is, can you talk a little bit more about creating a dedicated surge center within FEMA and how that could have avoided supply chain problems that got so much attention during the early months of COVID with PPE, cleaning supplies, toilet paper, et cetera? Then in conjunction with that, one aspect of our response to COVID-19 that has emerged as a point of concern is what many call the last mile, actions at the state and local levels linking into national resources. The question asks, could we please briefly discuss how the Commission specifically recommends improving integration of these levels into the framework of a national response to get what is needed at the point of need?
Thank you, Lisa, appreciate it. So for that question, dealing kind of with the surge center and talking a little bit about the last mile, I'd like to reach out to Pete Dordahl and Stan Waltz, who worked on our supply working group here to offer us a response. So maybe Pete, you first and then to Stan.
General Hotel, I think you've got me, hopefully.
We do, Pete, thanks.
Thanks for the question. Hello, everybody. And in summary, to answer that question as specifically as we can, the concept that we're promoting with the FEMA Surge Center is just as a number of folks have already mentioned, is that the Surge Center would be, in fact, the coordinating authority at the national level for surging during these national level events. What we found time and time again was a disconnect between all the different response capabilities that we have in this country being joined together in one effort. The Surge Center is not meant to be something that's static, that's brought online once an event starts. The Surge Center is meant to be 24/7, as I think it's already been mentioned, but a persistent situational awareness center. Think of it as a technology center that is AI enabled, that is constantly watching the demand signal and the supply signals to match those at the time of need, at the moment and perhaps before the moment of need, already being able to identify what the demand is and where the supply will come from. So many different disparate capabilities exist in a very strong manner, but we notice time and time again, and my own business was very much in the forefront of responding to COVID-19, unable to connect the dots, unable to get to the right jurisdiction, to the right contracting authority, to the right decision maker at the time of crisis to deliver these type of materials. So the Surge Center would be monitoring at all times, access to people, access to places, access to supplies. They would connect the dots from industry, from governments at all levels, federal, state, and local, to ensure that there was this constant flow of connectivity in real time, and again, persistently being aware of all these interactions so that they can be deployed on a moment's notice. Over.
Thanks, Pete, wonderful. Stan, over to you, please.
All right. So can you hear me, General?
You can, Stan. Thanks for joining.
Okay, great. So a couple of interesting lines of research and thought associated with a command center around supply. One of the things that is absolutely true is that we as a nation don't have total asset visibility of all the things that are currently out there. So you mentioned PPE. PPE is a great example. It's in constant demand, throughout the nation. Not necessarily the way it has been during COVID, which obviously increased. That's the surge part of it. But the starting point is to be able to see what's out there. And I think one of the interesting things we found out that is really missing currently is the connection with private industry, who have production rates, capabilities that government's not necessarily aware of. That actually saw demands around the world associated with COVID really before the U.S. even understood all that. So tying those things together, seeing what's out there in states and local governments and industry, understanding time to ramp up, production times, all that stuff in advance instead of waiting to be reactive once a disaster hits, is a major effort associated with that particular center, supply center.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. And before we move to the next question with Lisa here, let me just see if any of our co-chairs have a comment on this. Alex, I don't know if you wanted to touch on this aspect or not.
Certainly. Joe, can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. As I said earlier, I think one of the gaps that businesses had is where do we reach out and where do we connect? Is this an HHS? Is this a DHS? Is this a commerce issue? And developing this common location where we can establish, again, a common database and framework to pass along this information, to use as a nexus to coordinate, we feel is more essential than ever. And it's certainly our hope then, and this was certainly brought to life by some of the other commissioners like Jenny Rometty, she can certainly chime in here, is then how do we apply the right kind of technology infrastructure to make sure that we can collect, analyze, synthesize real-time data and translate that into information that can be actionable, that can be consistent across platforms, and that we can ultimately get to the right agencies, the right public or private partners to ensure we're ultimately taking the actions that are required. And we just saw that this was a gap, and certainly one that we can bring together by establishing this strategy and then hopefully putting the actual infrastructure in place so they can obviously get into action as a surge center.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. And excellent here. So let's, Lisa, let's go back to you. Let's get the next question here, and I think we've got a few others in the queue here. So.
Yes, we do. The next is it still your vision that there would be a known cadre of paid and volunteer people trained, prepared, and ready to participate in the national response effort without delay, and conveners in localities to coordinate?
Thanks. Great question here. So as Mark and others have mentioned, people was a major focus of this. For this question, I'd actually like to reach out to Roger Shedland, who was again one of our working group leaders in the group that looked at the human resource aspect of this. So Roger, to you, please.
Hello. Can everyone hear me?
We hear you, Roger.
Terrific. Thanks for the opportunity to present here. We in the people group, we really felt it was important to capitalize on the strong American desire to serve and remove barriers to service utilizing a civilian expertise reserve. And importantly, we felt that this could be modeled after a lot of the strengths of the National Guard in terms of recruitment and employment protection, and also modeled after some successful FEMA programs, such as the disaster reservists, as well as the community emergency response team. Additionally, we felt that the skill sets needed to be broad to respond to today and tomorrow's disasters. So beyond the typical medical, we felt cybersecurity needed to be there, data analytics, basic science, information technology, et cetera. And we felt that this group of civilian expertise reserve would be supported by a professional, full-time command and control structure. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. Roger, can you just touch for a moment on the volunteer aggregator and talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So in addition, General Votel, to the need for a broad range of skilled civilians, we felt it was important to tap into a broader group, and we felt that use of a volunteer aggregator, which would consist of a database of ready volunteers, would be important. And the aggregator would be modeled after such organizations as the Red Cross Network for Good, AmeriCorps, and Service Year Alliance. And this would provide, you know, a wide set of opportunities on a national level, and again, could be utilized as with the Guard on both the national and a state level.
Excellent. Thanks, thanks, Roger, for those insights. And before we move to the next question, I just want to stop with the co-chairs, see if there's anything they wanted to add on this
Yes,
people,
General.
human
Yes.
resource aspect.
Yes, Joe, if I may, I cannot emphasize enough when I was secretary how impressed I was when I'd go to disaster scenes at the level of volunteerism, people who were willing to pitch in and help their neighbors in an organized fashion with cleanup, relocation. And it reflects really, in my judgment, the American spirit. And we need to continue to tap into that in an organized way. Thanks.
Thanks. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, General, I would also add on top of those excellent remarks that one of the other findings in Roger's group, which struck me, was the fact that there are indeed situations where people want to volunteer, but they're occupied full time with their job, especially physicians. They have practices. They can't walk away from their practices and abandon them for 3 months. However, they might be able to step away for 2 weeks. And even capturing a lot of physicians for 2-week gigs can add up to a lot. And having an app that facilitates that, I think will give us a lot more capacity and leverage than we would normally see. And I thought that was a great finding from the people group. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
Joe,
Go ahead, Alex.
Joe, I would also add, to build on both Mark and Jay's comments, I think there was a common theme among businesses as well, is that this is an area where, again, we can have government and corporate America working in a much more integrated way. So for example, there are medical healthcare experts in organizations like ours. There are IT experts, for example, in organizations like IBM, logisticians that run the gamut across. And how do we develop a kind of seamless infrastructure where we can bring these skills, capabilities to bear on a regional, on a federal level, or on a local level, and certainly do it in ways that may have to respond, again, to a unique surge versus a more sustained period of time. And we think that there's a great opportunity, again, for partnering to take place and to get people to the right place at the right time.
Great. Thanks, thanks, Alex, very much. Okay, Lisa, let's go to the next question, please.
Okay, our next question is, the commission seems to take a very strong stand on internet access for all. Why is that important to emergency response?
Okay, thank you. Yes, this was quite a passionate part of our discussions through several of our meetings. We're very fortunate today to have one of our commissioners who frankly led the discussion on this, Jeannie Romedy, on with us today. So Jeannie, if I could pass it out to you, I'd love you to tackle that question.
Can you hear me?
We can, Jeannie.
You can now? Okay. Sorry, and you cut out right when the question was coming, but I did hear universal broadband access. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Okay. So if I may, just as I heard Secretary Johnson say, we're all a product of our experiences. And obviously the issue of a digital divide existed long before this commission and this pandemic. However, I think we've all seen the impact of the pandemic has been very uneven across this country. And I've had the chance not only to participate in BENS, but also in a number of state commissions. And I will tell you that all roads lead to this underlying requirement that there be universal broadband access for all. And if you just step back and look at why, there's the obvious reason that the commission speaks to, which is about keeping processes and businesses essential and supporting essential working. But the second thing is to keep people working. And what we've seen is the huge unemployment and impact on small businesses, and disproportionate to women and all people of color. And so this issue to redeploy their skills, and I've watched as people have tried to get jobs now, and if they don't have broadband access, their inability to even do a job from their home. So One is just keep people working. The second is redeploy people. The third is obviously education. The fourth is telehealth. And so this, to me, every different aspect, if you've learned at either or looked at how to do the recovery or how to recover faster or keep moving through the period of the crisis, has required universal broadband access. So I've become a really strong advocate about this. And it isn't just the quality of broadband, it is you also need the device and the cost, all three of these, to be in line. And there are estimates, plus or minus $100 billion, which in the spirit and in the context of the money being spent around the recovery is actually a small number. And so I think this is one of those things, just like we might think of electricity as almost a universal right, that is now the time that we no longer debate it, but implement this because it underpins so many of the requirements that the commission came up with.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. Really, really appreciate it. And
Joe,
yes, go ahead,
maybe add one point on to, I really think the important points that Jenny made. I think, look, the other dynamic that we've all realized here is that as we've gone through this crisis, that the way that digital is utilized throughout business, throughout government, has just been on steroids and accelerated. And so making sure that we've got the infrastructure to support that is absolutely essential for us to again, have a coordinated effort across all of our different activities.
Thanks, Alex. Really appreciate it. Okay, Lisa, let's go to the next question. I know we've got a number that are lining up in the queue there.
Yes, we do. Next is, have you gotten any sense that there might be support for any of your recommended changes in the Biden administration or on Capitol Hill?
Yes, thank you. Absolutely key here as we move forward in this, and we have done some preparatory work on and with both the new administration and in Congress. But let me reach out to a couple of our commissioners to provide a perspective here, and I'd like to start with Christy Rogers. And Christy, maybe if you can talk a little bit about approaching this with Congress, and then we'll go to Craig Fugate to maybe talk a little bit about with the new administration. So Christy, to you first, please.
Thanks, General Votel, and thanks everybody for joining today and the critical report and call to action from BENS and this commission. Yeah, on the Hill right now, BENS has done a great job already with the co-chairs and with General Votel and some outreach. With the Senate in particular, I think you'll find very receptive leaders, primarily on the Senate Homeland Security Committee, with soon-to-be Chairman Gary Peters, and Ranking Member Rob Portman. Notably, though, the Senate has not yet passed the resolution on the 50-50 power sharing, so everything is kind of in flux. So I do think you're going to have a very open members of Congress and Congress. And we've been working very closely with the Senate. So once the Senate staff, once the power sharing deal is done and the Senate committees prioritize their issues, we have heard already from senior Senate staff that the committees, particularly Homeland Security, has a laser focus on COVID and its response. So I think they are anxiously awaiting this commission's recommendations. Similarly, on the House side with the Homeland Security Committee, Chairman Benny Thompson and Ranking Member John Katko. Very receptive initially, and looking and waiting to see how they can act on these recommendations. So Congress is about 2-3 months behind in their organization, but the staff is already trying to prepare the priority list. So I think we keep moving forward, but as General Votel said in the very beginning, the really hard work is yet to begin. We need to see that these recommendations are actually, in fact, implemented by both Congress and the executive branch.
I really, really appreciate it. Let's go to Craig Fugate, please.
Well, we were fortunate that BENS was able to brief the transition team at Homeland Security. Again, I was on the transition team. And I think in the Biden administration, you're already seeing elements of our recommendations, at least in the spirit of how they are currently planning for and responding to COVID. Looking at FEMA's role in supporting the vaccination efforts, looking at the whole of government, bringing the teams together. So I think the BENS report will be well received, and it actually gives them a roadmap, I think, as far as implementing a lot of what they are doing right now. And looking at turning this, as Secretary Johnson knows, in the Obama administration, FEMA got used for a lot of things besides natural hazard response because it was seen as that crisis agency. But we didn't codify that in a way that passed on to the next administration. So I think what's important is to take these recommendations and look at how we codify this, meaning it goes in the law, it goes into recommendations and regulations so that we're not reinventing our response to the next disaster that doesn't fit the existing models.
Thanks, Craig. Really appreciate it. And before we leave this, just anything from the co-chairs here.
Joe, it's Mark. I would just add that on our commission, we had two sitting senators from each side of the House. We had Senator Maggie Hassan and Senator Bill Cassidy, who participated very actively, and I believe understand our messages and our findings. And we also had support. House rules wouldn't allow any representatives to sit on our commission, but we had support from two representatives, John Katko and Alyssa Slotkin, who also engaged. So I think that's yet another connection that's going to be very important for us.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it.
Mark just made the point I was going to make. Thanks, Mark.
Sorry, sir.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Okay, Lisa, let's go to you for the next question here. And I know we're closing in on time here, so this may be our last question. I will, just for the co-chairs, I will circle back to all of you here just as we close out here. We'll make a determination after this question whether we have time for one more. But Lisa, next question, please.
All right, our next one is technology is featured in several sections of your report. What are some serious technology challenges the Commission heard about from the pandemic response? And what are your biggest priorities in terms of tech improvements?
Thanks. Yeah. So this loomed extraordinarily large over the entire commission here, and for this question, I'd actually like to go out to Sam Cole, who led our working group on infrastructure, which he quickly, along with his excellent team, kind of redefined on the digital infrastructure and addressed a number of technology topics in this. And I know from the question and answering, we've got a number of very specific technology questions that are popping up. So Sam, if I could go out to you, please, to comment on this.
Sure thing. Thank you, General. So we had a number of recommendations around digital infrastructure. We found it obviously core to the problem set here. The first you heard from Ms. Rometty was around aggressively expanding digital infrastructure into underserved communities to bridge the digital gap. But there were several other recommendations that we felt quite strongly about. One was accelerating the deployment of 5G networks. The second was really moving and upgrading and securing federal, state, and local government front-end applications, data storage, and processing. We also had additional recommendations around securing our networks from IoT vulnerabilities by creating layered defenses. As you probably know, this has gained even more force recently with the SolarWinds Orion penetration. And then there were a series of recommendations about building the capacity to invest what we call trusted capital in small and medium-sized enterprises across communications, decentralized computing, and Internet of Things. And finally, developing the computational resources and capabilities to use timely and accurate data for effective response in national crises.
Sam, thanks very much. And for the co-chairs, anything to add on this technology aspect?
Nope, spot on.
Excellent. And is Chris Roberti on? Chris, we know that Chris is from the Chamber of Commerce here, one of our commissioners, and he had some pretty strong impressions on this technology aspect as well. Chris, I don't know if you're on or not.
We don't think he was able to join us today.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Let's go to the next question there.
Okay, For our next question, we have a comment: fascinating work and congratulations on the effort. Many leaders in business and government and the higher ed sectors have been advocating national service for a variety of civic and educational reasons. I wonder if you considered whether such a mobilization of America's youth could help train for and staff component functions in the national response enterprise.
Thanks. Excellent question. We just happen to have General Stan McChrystal, who I think was a member of was one of our commissioners, but I know has a lot of strong work in this particular area. So Stan, if you're there and you want to address that, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, it looks like we don't have Stan. Lisa, another question.
Apologies, one moment. Okay, our next question. There is often a discussion about defense industrial base. Does there need to be a concept that develops surrounding Homeland Security industrial base, as common items may compete for demands during national mobilization?
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Secretary, looks like you're going to handle this one first, and I'm sure Alex and Mark will probably have some comments on this as well.
There needs to be a Homeland Security industrial base that encompasses transportation, cybersecurity, healthcare, pandemic response, across the board. Absolutely.
I think Jay said it well.
Yeah, I agree. And I would add that, and I think you said this, Mr. Secretary, when we had the discussions on the commission, that one of the tricky differences between a Homeland Security industrial base and the defense industrial base is that a lot of the tools, products in the base is dual use with both government and industry. And so that probably also suggests a different kind of public-private partnership to deal with it.
Correct.
Thanks.
Fair point.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. And and I know Pete Dordal. Pete, I don't know if you have a view on this particular topic or not. We'd love to hear you on that. Okay.
Yes, sir. I'm here. It just had to reload. Thank you. Absolutely. When we first started this effort on the surge group, we were calling it the stability industrial base, and then turned it to the response industrial base. And the reason being was that so many companies that we're involved with were a part of the defense industrial base, supporting things overseas like the global war on terror and the Ebola crisis. So many of those companies actually responded to COVID-19. And as we took a survey of all the businesses and hospital groups and PPE providers, there was a similarity in our expeditionary activities that we could draw back here to the United States. And so, to echo the Secretary's comments, absolutely, there is a wider industrial base that is ready and primed to participate in the national response enterprise.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of our time here. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks for your questions. We've tried to combine questions here as best we could here from a variety of people to make sure that we are covering on the kind of the full waterfront of the report. So we really appreciate you doing that. For some of you who have additional questions, you can email them to CNRE@BENS.org, and we will get back to you on that. Let me now just finally finish up with our co-chairs, and we'll go in the same order that we finished here: Mark, Alex, and Secretary Johnson. Any final comments, gentlemen, from the three of you? Mark, you first.
Yes, sir. Thank you, General. 3 points I'd like to make as I close. One, we talked about whole of nation response. That has a lot of implications. And it certainly means that it only happens if we have the whole of nation, which underlines Ginny Romity's point of ubiquitous high-speed capacity internet connectivity. The second point is we need to have an established common operating picture. We all of us see parts of it, but we never bring it all together. We think we can do this within FEMA in the reimagined NRCC, and this will help with all the challenges we talked about: surge, supply, distribution, and the like. And finally, we have a lot of capability. All disasters ultimately the rubber meets the road locally. So we have local capabilities that of various degrees within the states and local municipalities. What we don't have is we don't have them interconnected. And many of these things that have attacked, like COVID, COVID is a network attack. It infects us as a network. It's geometric. So is cyber. We need to have a network response, and we need to figure out a way to network a lot of our local capabilities so they can work in harmony. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Alex, anything?
Look, thank you, Mark. Thank you to my fellow commissioners and co-chairs. And look, hopefully all of you have found these to be purposeful, practical, pragmatic approaches to addressing this kind of issue. I think the other thing that we've learned is it's going to take a lot more work to take them from broad brush statements to very specific operational ideas that can be executed at the ground level. Clearly, it's going to take a lot of partnership. And my only other call is let's not waste this crisis to bring forward a meaningful call to action on how we can be much better prepared in the future, because it's surely only a question of when, not if, we're likely to face something else of similar magnitude. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Mr. Secretary.
I agree with Alex. I used to say at Homeland Security, let's plan for the next crisis, not the last crisis. Too often after a crisis, after an attack of some sort, we spend a lot of time ensuring that what happened can't happen again. But in this case, we know that there will be another pandemic, there will be another lethal virus. So we are planning for the future. We're not just responding to the past. And if we don't, shame on us.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your attention. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out with additional questions. We look forward to talking more about this in the public space. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.